Guys, so welcome to part two of our lecture. All right, so we already know from part one that the Spanish had a huge here in the Americas, being, the Portuguese were first to explore, and the Spanish were second, but the Spanish definitely gained more ground, more territory, caused more devastation to people. So when it comes to Pueblo people, I mean, they already had doing conflicts with the Apache, and they were really discontent with Spanish rule, and so they their own operation to contest the Spanish. And within 3 years of that, the Spanish crushed the Pueblo. But the Spanish learned they were not going to give up the right to rule over the land, and people definitely became a little more, I guess, congenial, you could say, with it. They became a little softer. I started being more tolerant and basing that relationship based on something that was going to work for everybody. And then, failing because what do we see? Forced Indian labor. We have a forced religion on them. People, all these gold riches that many times just did not exist. So with this map, see a little bit of what is considered New Mexico at the time, and just those areas of Spanish conquest, which we see goes way down into about the middle of South America, what we would call Central America. So about to there are countries there are escaping me, but I think Panama, maybe the last one down there, guys, but Central America up into the southwest of the United States. Now, what's interesting about the Pueblos is they were actually, one of indeed the oldest cultures here in North America. And if you've ever been out into the southwest or even places like southern Colorado, they have these great twists from um, Pueblo and other groups. And so here I just thought was a cool picture inhabited sites in the United States of the Pueblo city there. All right, so by the time we get to the French in America, as we already know from the first part of our lecture, the French were definitely, even though they had differences with the Native American groups, they were really all about trade and about trading those furs and fishing. So, they were able to set up their empires in a way that was definitely more inclusive. They were intermarrying and intermingling with the Indians, of course, the rest of them were doing that too, but not to. But once again, the French were really doing it in this mutually beneficial ways, and rather than trying to convert the Native American people to their definitely more open Indian culture. Else really was like, we're going to kill you if you don't convert, do what we say. We don't care. This is all ours now. Hate you. We hate your clothes. We hate your wife, your kids. We're going to kick your dogs and burn the house down, and you're going to do what we say now. The French were definitely more about out and learning and understanding. So with the success of the French and their trading endeavors in North America, the Dutch decided, of course, the Dutch already had the East India Company and in continent and over, of course, in the Middle East and in the Far East world, trying to get this global isle. And so their first settlement, Albany, Manhattan Island, is what they call New Netherlands, and for the most part, the Dutch had an alliance with the Native American groups, the Iroquois over there. And so, and they also, things would do is they would put these different native groups against each other. So you had natives working with the Dutch and trade, and then you had the French over here working with these groups. And so pretty much like everybody was trying to fight for that control over those furs, especially beaver. That was important at the time. And then getting control Great Lakes area up there there where Canada and North America kind of meet area that ended up. All right. So when it comes to basically that just says how to tobacco cultivation, Saint English colonization in states in America. There it goes. It's going away now. Of course, one of the first colonies was Jamestown there in the early 1600s. Of course, Jamestown colonists, they were hoping to find gold. They were hoping to get an easier way to get to India and get gold and more power and all that stuff. So encountered what was the Powhatan tribe there in the northeast, and so they kind of conformed an alliance, and the Powhatans helped Jamestown because they were supplying with food. And so then we get the Powhatan Confederacy. And when, the native groups realized that the Indians weren't here to be friends and make peace, they were just here to invade and possess and cause havoc, pretty much. So, so this is when the Powhatans, this is where you kind of get that Pocahontas story, which, of course, I think his name Smith, the guy John Smith is who Pocahontas was supposed to have married. Well, John Smith was like one of the captains who was a main leader of Jamestown, and it is not true that him and Pocahontas fell in love and married like you see in the Disney cartoon. Pocahontas actually married somebody else named John Wolfe, and that was kind of a way for the Powhatans and the English to kind of come together and work with each other. But because the English were so and pushing their policies of exclusion, which meant that them being English, they felt they were better than the Native Americans and they had more rights. Kept on going, and there's Mr. John Smith with the Powhatan brother Chief. I think it's a. Hold on, give me a minute, and I'll say it. Now or something to that effect. I probably butchered that. I'm so sorry. And so he defeated Powhatan, the Cherokees, Algonquin Confederacy. So the Powhatan, they're part of the Iroquois. These um, eastern groups. All right. So by the time we get to English coming in and establishing more colonies. We see Virginia and Maryland pick next, the Chesapeake Bay area. And by this time, there wasn't so much an emphasis on that fur and fishing. Now it was all about growing tobacco. And so tobacco became the mercantile commodity. And so John Roof developed a mild hybrid variety of tobacco. Smoking became very fashionable in Europe, and of course, John Wolfe there and Pocahontas story or John Wolfe Pocahontas is where they were. And so tobacco cultivation was highly lucrative, although it was really labor intensive, and it depleted the soils quickly. That's why the southeastern part of the United States couldn't sustain itself on tobacco production and things like cotton production, not just because it was based on slave labor, but it's also really bad for the soil. So that's why, like, places like Alabama is considered to have this red dirt. And what it is Alabama has no more topsoil because of all the cotton farming that was done. So they basically just have a clay. They're just, no topsoil. So they're down to that subsoil. And in a lot of places, you do have just red dirt because of all. And so that's what tobacco intensified agriculture. If you don't get crop rotation, you're not repleting nutrients into the soil, then you're just going to kill land much. And so, because it was so labor intensive, of course, this was a massive importation of labor from England. And then, of course, wanting to expand. So, we're starting to push more westward into the Indian Territory. And so, Virginia was kind of a colony of exclusion because of that tobacco cultivation. And by 1622, we see the Native Americans just an all out assault, killing nearly a third of all the settlers. And that just created a conflict that lasted for about so, all right. So then we get to Maryland. Like, and how great and the culvert and sit over in England and determine that 10 million acres that we're already living on was going to be given to this next step of people that showed up and said, this bar's oh, wonderful. That's democracy, right? And so the more Moors, Catholic, they encouraged a lot of Catholics to migrate to the colony. It's the only minority kind of support and protection as opposed to the other, major minority. And though Albert, French, when it economic, ideation of Maryland. Maryland quickly became plantation. It's mirroring Virginia, and then based this system land tenure that is and tenure based on like what's a good kind of like land tenure, as in like they would give people parts of the land, and then you had to give part of what you grew or what you earned on that land back in charge. And so we see you, and then what we see here we go. Bye. So what we see here is community life in the Chesapeake. Just graph there of the number of people immigrating to Virginia and Maryland. Three-quarters were indentured service. The majority were young, unskilled males serving terms of up to 7 years. And so, supposedly at the end of that 7 years, then you would get to own what you had. Um, there were a few unmarried women, and they actually fared better than the men because the unmarried women, as soon as they got here, most of them married off quickly, and so that gave them some economic advantage because they were married to people who had control and the power, right? And so life was pretty crude. There were few churches and schools by the 1560s, but we see that, the colonies were growing rapidly. The first slaves were brought there in 1619. And then what do we see by by the 1700s, 900,000 people were living in the Chesapeake Bay region, and they were still closely connected to trading with England. All right, and so the northern region of North America was really different from the Chesapeake in terms of climate, economy, and especially religion, because it had become this place of what you would call it was a distinct place for Protestant dissenters or the Puritans. The Puritans left Europe because they were fighting persecution from the Catholic Church, pretty much. And so with the Puritans, we had the followers of John Calvin, and pretty much it was their desire to purify the English church. They were attracted to the Puritan faith and encouraged in enterprise, but there were also critics of social and economic problems that were going on in England, and so they came here to kind of set up their own colonies. And then, the Pilgrims were the first to establish the colony there within New England, and of course, that was aboard the Mayflower. That part we hear is true. And they were religious separatists, and they were mostly families and hired single men, single women, women without children. We'll talk about that in a minute, but they were a little suspicious of them. And just like we see with Jamestown, the people at Plymouth colony, they really struggled within those first years. The first Thanksgiving that we hear about, quite how it went down. Yes, because there were so many people dying, it does seem like the Native Americans took pity on them, and they did, and they would share food with them. But it being this great feast where everybody came together and it was all lovey-dovey and harmony is just not true. And because of the help of the Native Americans, the Pilgrims were able to become self-sufficient, farming, fishing community there. All right, so by the time we get to the Massachusetts Bay Colony, what we see is a changing political and religious situation. Of course, in England, that caused the Puritans to come here. And then by 1629, we have this royal charter granted to the which would become the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and it was about 200 people sent to the area to set up this colony under the leadership of John Winthrop's. And so what they did was they created the city upon a hill, and that was a model for reform in England. Over the next 14 years, we see 20,000 Puritans relocate to Massachusetts. So, we start exploding in populations, and we get village, and eventually Boston was created. And, taking advantage of a loophole in their, they pretty much basically they took a loophole in that charter and were able to kind of set up their own government. And so this is when we really start to see the beginnings of democratic principles that America was founded on. All right, so even though the Puritans here, because they escaping religious prosecution from Europe, they weren't very tolerant of other religious views. And so differences between Thomas Hooker and, these Plymouth colonies, they went and later founded Connecticut. Roger Williams, then, because he was a little more religiously tolerant, ended up going to Rhode Island. And then we see within a couple years, we have Anne Hutchinson moving a bunch of people to Rhode Island and to escape religious persecution. All All right. And so when it comes to the relationship between the Indians and the Puritans, we see a different relationship with the French and Dutch. Now, remember when the French and Dutch came here, they weren't so much about getting land and forming settlements. It was just all about being able to do those trade for those furs and fishing stuff, right? Well, the New England colonists, they wanted the land. They wanted land. They didn't understand how to work the land. They didn't understand or have enough respect for the Native American population to actually, to really learn from them. And then, of course, most of the Native population was decimated by disease. A lot of the English settlers were killed off by disease. So, that really opened up New England to have more immigrants coming in, right? And so what we see is, the more that the English population was growing, the more the Indians in the area were kind of resisting. And so, they were getting, of course, just like with all the rest of them, they were getting into these wars. But, with the Puritans, it was definitely justifying those wars more based on a religious sense, right? And then by the time we get to economy, once again, French, Dutch were more of these scrapper fur traders. New England, they were more merchants. And so they were doing more of the sales traveling. They were doing the sales of lands and supplies. And you see that the English Civil War was won by the Puritans under Oliver Cromwell. That led to the English Commonwealth, the end of the Puritan persecution here in the New World. And because of this, many colonists decided to go back to England. Meanwhile, we had this New England merchant class emerging. They began shipping cod to the West Indies, developed commercial fleets, which made Boston the third largest trading center in the British world. And it really distinguished the New England economy from the fur dependent systems of France. All right. And so when it comes to the New England colonies, there was a strong emphasis on family and, social ordained by God was kind of how they determined social status. Most of the settlers came together and they made these towns, so they were clustering together as in opposed to some other groups that were being a little more adventurous and kind of wanting to not be a part of it and wandering off on their own. And then the Puritans, they did have an education system. Of course, though, it was more focused on educating males. They were really suspicious of women. Women did play important roles within the family. Excuse me. But legally and socially, they were second class citizens and subordinate to men. They were married off very young, pretty much. They were kept barefoot and pregnant their whole life. And, the religion reinforced that this was just the way it was supposed to be. Women were supposed to be devoted to their husbands and families, and they didn't need to worry about anything other than that. And so, Spencers, widows, women who just defied this traditional view and were economically independent. They didn't need a man to help them. They really brought on a lot of suspicion from their neighbors. And so that's really where we get the Salem witch trials coming about. And of course, the Salem witch trials, it was just all about these kind of these unmarried, like what we would call women that defied social norms, and men. There were actually men that were accused during the Salem witch trials too. one person who was crushed to death. I think it was a Giles Corey. I think he was actually killed because they crushed him to death with these rocks, and the witch trials, we suspect it was pretty much moldy bread. Somebody, these kids ate moldy bread. There was this woman that probably, people were a little suspicious of in the community, and people get sick, and kids, they make up these stories. Oh, it's that lady, she's a witch, she's cavorting with the devil and the Indians. And so it basically just got out of control there for a little while. And there were a lot of women that were unjustifiably punished during this time. All right, and then next we get to the proprietary cultures. And this would be the Carolinas. Basically, Charles II grants Carolinas to a group of proprietors, and it's called the Marley region. It was already being settled by migrants from Virginia, but the proprietors' focus was on the coast along Charlestown, which was founded in 1670, excuse me, and it was basically given to Barbadian planters and their slaves. So they developed this plantation economy. And so they led this distinctive West Indian character to the colonies. By the 1700s, the population of South Carolina had grown to 6,000, half of them being slaves. All right, so now New York and New Jersey. So trade rivalry and commercial wars between England and Holland from about the 1620s to the 1650s. This led Charles II to send a fleet to capture New Amsterdam, which he gave to his brother James, who was the Duke of York, and a proprietary charter for the former Dutch colony. James then gets control of the Hudson Valley, renames it New York, and then in 1665, we see the Delaware region being split off into separate proprietary colonies of New Jersey. And by 1700, the two colonies had more than 33,000 residents. And the earliest known, oh, wait, here we go. The picture. The earliest known view of New Amsterdam from, this is a picture from 1651. We see Indian traders are arriving in their dugout canoes, which is very distinct to this, to the native people in this region. And then, 25 years after its founding, the Dutch settlement still occupied the lower tip of Manhattan Island. Takes us then to Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is actually, it's Quaker. It means a Quaker. A Penn is a Quaker. So a group of Quakers, which are another type of kind of unique religious groups that are, escaping persecution. They oh, where am I? Okay, William Penn. They led by William Penn. Were granted a huge area west of Delaware River. That's the western part of New Jersey. And then they got a larger area by 1681. And Charles, he settled a debt owed to William Penn's father with the proprietary grant, which would become William Penn's Holy Experiment. So Pennsylvania was formed. And this is where we have a new frame of government that guaranteed religious freedom, actually gave respect and consideration to the Native Americans, so much so that they signed a treaty with Delaware Chief Manning to gain legal title to the land. Pennsylvania and the Philadelphia area grew to 20,000 1,000 settlers by 1700. And then by 1704, Penn slips off because Penn splits off and became Delaware. Oh, it split off from Delaware. I wrote my notes wrong, sorry, and became its own separate self colony. Philadelphia eventually became the most important port in North America. And so Pennsylvania was actually very peaceful with their colonization, and it was exceptional and it was rare. However, the social, economic, religious, political, and territorial pressures resulting from this rapid expansion of the English colonies, definitely led to some long lasting periods of violence between the colonists and the Indians, a lot of intertribal warfare, intercolonial rival. And soon, events that were going on over in England caused unrest and violence in America. We see King Charles II dying. His brother James II is put in control. So then he now has controls over the colonies. He establishes the oppressive dominion of New England and pretty much like exerted his control over all those areas. So this is all present day New England, New York, and New Jersey. All right, so what we see is the beginning of King Philip's War. And so basically, what was going on is that people were mad about James II because he was Catholic. They were afraid there was going to be more religious warfare and persecution going on. And so we see the glorious rebellion, glorious revolution. And basically, James was deposed in 1688. His Protestant daughter Mary and her husband William of Orange were put in charge. That glorious revolution, they got a Bill of Rights, respect for civil liberties, increased rule for Parliament, and a restricted monarchy on the people of England and her colonies. In the colonies, however, the overthrow set off a series of rebellions against James appointed officials, the revocation of the Dominion of New England, and the restoration of traditional self government. Massachusetts, Maryland, and New York all remained loyal to the throne. So they were still loyal to England. Other people starting to get some discontent and dissension there with the English rule, right? And so then we see Metacon, who is King Philip of England. He was raised and educated among the New Englanders, sought inclusion for his people among them. But so he was a Native American, all right? So they brought him up into the English society, but he felt he was betrayed because he had to cede sovereignty of his homeland. So pretty much he had to I'll say that he acknowledged to pretty much like I'm no longer Indian. I'm now going to be a colonist and part of England, hail the Queen, or King, whatever. And so that kind of made people mad. King Philip, he felt humiliated because of the way that he was acting, and so he goes. He forms an alliance different Native American groups. There's a hostile response from the colonists, and they attack and they burn a lot of the Pokanoket villages. But the Indians, they quickly gained the upper hand, and for the next 2 years, though they found themselves outnumbered, under attack, not from the colonists, but also the Iroquois, who wouldn't help them. They rather fought against them. And then by 1676, Metacon, King Philip, was beheaded. The towns were destroyed, and more than two-thirds of the people killed were the native populations. And so there was a little bit of peace left among the Iroquois nation because pretty much the Iroquois, they were the most powerful group over here. And Northeast America. And so, they were really uncontested. People weren't really trying to challenge them too much. And so we see the Iroquois Confederacy, the colony of New York, creating an alliance that was the covenant change, and that pretty much gave the Iroquois dominance over all other tribes in this region. And that really put New York economic and political dominant position among the rest of the English colonies. And we see King Philip War was the most was the most destructive Indian colonist conflict in early American history, rivaled by only the Pueblo revolt over in New Mexico against the Spanish that we kind of started off talking about. So conflict over land, labor led to violence in Virginia. So where we have King Philip's War going on in New England, we see conflict and war poking up in the southern as people are pressing more westward, more southward into Indian land. We see Governor William Virginia is trying to get policies favorable to the landed elite, refuse military Western aid to Westerners, was fearing Indian attacks, and by the time, and then we have Bacon's rebellion. So basically, Nathaniel Bacon, he was a wealthy plantation owner and pretty much just started a war against the Indians because he wanted to. He wanted their stuff, he wanted their land, he wanted more power and authority. So he starts this rebellion, which grew into a war because they were killing Native Americans, and they also burned down Jamestown. And then Bacon died, and Berkeley, he was the governor there of Virginia, was able to get back in control. And then we also, similar event for war, which broke out in North Carolina. And basically, it was just a group of rebels that were fighting with the proprietors, like, control of the land and the resources. And so in South Carolina, colonial officers reacted to these events by provoking war among the Spanish and English Indian alliances, and that basically decimated native population, and it opened up new land for settlement. So, in a way, they got what they wanted. They got their more, at the cost of many lives. And then, I already talked about this. I forgot that glorious revolution. There, we see those changes of hands. I'm going to skip those because we talked about that. Anybody? But we talked about Charles II died, James II took over, and then Mary took over. And so, as how the colonists here felt about power in England changing control, there was definitely some discontent and some conflict going on here. So then that gets us to King William's War, and it was the first skirmish in a 75-year war between the English and the French. As you know, both of them, they're trying to get more land, trying to really gain more hold in the fur trade. So, they're trying to dominate and become number one in the fur trade and fighting against each other. And so basically, we just see, fights, attacks just breaking out all over the place as far as people concerned with the fur industry goes. And so basically, what we see is this was an inclusive war, and there was an inclusive peace. So basically, inclusive war, inclusive peace, it means that, it didn't really end. It didn't really make relationships better between any of these groups. And then, within 5 years, we see another war between France as a result of all this constant turmoil and expense to, associated with defending her claims in North America. England really tightened its control over the colonies, and this included the conversion of the remaining charter and proprietary colonies into royal colonies. Even though there in Pennsylvania, William Penn was still able to maintain some kind of private control over Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. They also got to reinstate their charter governments. And so during the 17th century, European colonization expanded sharply. Then we start to see Spanish New Mexico. We start to see the English moving over into that part of North America and over into the Spanish territories. And so we see European population for 250,000 people. And then, of course, lots of violent conflicts and disruption to the Native American communities. And, by this time, the Spanish were accommodating and working with the Pueblo. The English, they were just astounded, man. They were not going to work with the Indians in any way, shape, or form. All right, guys. So that wraps up the second part of our week. So what we see from the 16 to the 1700s, so the 17th century, definitely start to see more establishment of European colonies in the Americas, and of course, that just created more conflict with Native Americans. A lot of the colonists found ways to with the Native people, but a lot of them and really, as we just talked about, they really just had no interest and just wanted to get away with the dirty savages that lived here any way they could, because it was the divine right that they, as the English people, had the right over the land and all the resources, as opposed to these dirty savage heathens. And so and these patterns of colonization, the way that these relationships worked out with the different groups, definitely starts setting the stage for what will later become America, the United States of America. And not quite as we know it yet. We hadn't got independence yet. We hadn't even started setting up. But we see by, of course, the 1800s, America does become its own nation. All right, guys. Thanks for watching. And remember, you can reach out to me for anything. Thanks, guys. You see you in the discussions. Bye.